What happens when a powerful black CEO is treated like he doesn't belong in first class? When silence becomes strength and quiet dignity sparks a corporate reckoning? Today's story is not just about airline service, it's about race, respect, and the quiet force of justice. Stay with us as we reveal how one man turned humiliation into a lesson the entire airline industry would never forget. Before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Malcolm Rivers sat in first class, a successful CEO accustomed to luxury. He had pre-ordered his meal, lobster bisque and filet mignon, exactly what he always chose. But when the flight attendant returned with an apologetic look, telling him they were out of his meal, something inside him snapped. What should have been a routine flight became the spark for something much bigger. In that moment, Malcolm realized it wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. The coldness in her tone, the dismissive shrug, the way she offered him a meager sandwich and tap water while the other passengers dined on caviar. He knew this wasn't an accident. He wasn't just another CEO. He wasn't just another passenger. He was the only black man in the cabin, and he could feel it. This wasn't about a meal. It was about being underestimated, disrespected, and dismissed, yet again. And Malcolm Rivers wasn't the type of man to let that slide. What happened next would change everything for Stratus Air and send a powerful message no one would forget. Keep watching to see how one small moment of disrespect turned into a game-changing power move. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Trust me, you'll want to see how this story unfolds. Malcolm Rivers, a man used to commanding boardrooms and managing multi-billion-dollar deals, had no reason to expect that his flight on Stratus's Flight 917 would become the scene of a transformation he never saw coming. Dressed in his tailored navy suit and polished loafers, he moved through the first-class cabin with the same quiet confidence that accompanied him in every business negotiation. The smell of fresh linen and champagne filled the air, creating the illusion of luxury that Stratus Air prided itself on. As he settled into his seat, Malcolm opened his tablet, diving into the merger presentation that was set to finalize the next morning in Geneva. His mind was already miles ahead, strategically planning for the next big leap in his company's European expansion. But despite his focus, something was off. He could feel the soft murmur of passengers around him, the quiet hum of the plane's engines. Everything was as it should be. But then the flight attendant came by offering him the menu. He barely glanced up. He'd already pre-ordered his meal as he always did, knowing exactly what he wanted. Lobster bisque followed by filet mignon, a luxury that came with his position. It was more than just a meal. It was a symbol of the treatment he had come to expect from companies like Stratus Air, which catered to its high-paying customers. He placed the order calmly, almost as an afterthought, and returned to his work. But the attendant's response was different this time. She hurried off almost too quickly, and he sensed something wasn't right. Moments later, she came back, the tightness in her smile obvious. "I'm sorry, sir. We're out of the luxury meal options. You'll have to choose from the regular selection." Her voice was smooth, but there was something about it that didn't sit well with him. Malcolm blinked, confused. "Out? I pre-ordered." Her response was as dismissive as it was casual. "It must not have gone through. Happens sometimes." She turned and walked away before he could even respond. His jaw tightened, but his expression remained impassive. What had just happened? For over a decade, Malcolm had been flying with Stratus Air. Never before had his pre-ordered meal been overlooked, let alone in first class. He stared at his tray, the pathetic sandwich and lukewarm water mocking him, while the other passengers around him, all white men in tailored suits, were served with a lavish display of caviar and champagne. It wasn't just a meal. It wasn't just about a small oversight. The dismissiveness of the attendant, her body language, the way she rushed off without offering a solution, the lack of apology, told him everything he needed to know. He'd been overlooked, not just as a customer, but as a person. He was the only black man in the cabin. And in that moment, he felt it more deeply than ever before. He scanned the room, his gaze locking on the other passengers. 6 men, all seated comfortably, sipping champagne and chatting. They hadn't noticed what had just happened, nor would they ever. To them, the flight was just another mundane routine. But to Malcolm, this was something else. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a pattern. Malcolm wasn't new to this. He had lived with this kind of disregard before. The subtle racism, the unspoken assumptions that he didn't belong in certain spaces, that he didn't deserve the same level of treatment as others. But Malcolm was strategic. He didn't react impulsively. No, he would make them pay for this, calmly, quietly, but decisively. For the next 10 minutes, his mind churned with a quiet fury. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random failure of service. Something had happened behind the scenes that had led to this. As he tapped his fingers on the armrest, he realized he had been cast aside, reduced to someone not worth the effort. But Malcolm wasn't someone who would allow this kind of treatment to go unanswered. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Isaac Ford, his assistant. "Everything okay?" the message read. Malcolm wasn't just going to sit there feeling humiliated. He wasn't going to let Stratus Air get away with this. He responded with one sentence. "Initiate internal audit protocol. Flight 917. Cabin crew ID needed. Confirm when ready." It wasn't just about his meal anymore. It wasn't even about the flight attendant who had dismissed him. This was about sending a message. He would expose this culture of exclusivity, of overlooked promises, and turn it into a lesson for everyone at Stratus. As the flight continued, Malcolm remained calm, his expression unreadable. The flight attendants went about their duties, none of them knowing what was happening in the background. They were too busy serving drinks and chatting with the other passengers, paying no mind to the man who had been made to feel invisible. But Malcolm had already set his plan in motion. By the time the plane landed in Geneva, everything would have changed. Isaac Ford, Malcolm's ever-vigilant assistant, was already deep into the airline's employee records. His fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard, pulling up the personnel files of the flight attendants on board. He knew that Malcolm's requests weren't casual. Everything had a purpose. He accessed the records, confirming his suspicions about the staff's behavior. The one flight attendant who had denied Malcolm his meal had a history of complaints, discriminatory remarks, rude behavior, even passive-aggressive comments about prioritizing certain guests. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was systemic. In the corporate world, the smallest act of disrespect can cause ripples. For Malcolm, it was never just about getting even. It was about exposing the system and forcing change, making sure that no one would ever be treated this way again. Malcolm tapped the service button again, this time more deliberately. When the older flight attendant approached him, there was a visible hesitation in his step, like he already knew something had shifted. Malcolm wasn't the same man who had quietly ordered his meal earlier. His voice was calm but firm as he asked for clarification on the meal issue again, his eyes never leaving the attendant's face. "I pre-ordered a luxury meal," Malcolm said, his tone pointed, "and yet I've been given something else. You mentioned something about prioritizing guests. Can you explain that?" The flight attendant stammered, unable to respond before Malcolm cut him off. "I understand," Malcolm said. His words were deliberate, precise. "I understand completely." The flight was nearing its descent into Geneva, but Malcolm was already several steps ahead. His next move would be the final one, and the results would be undeniable. As the plane landed, he knew Stratus Air would feel the impact of his quiet decision. It was no longer about him or the flight attendants. It was about making sure that an airline that prided itself on luxury finally understood what true respect meant. Once on the ground, two sharply dressed airline officials were waiting for him. Malcolm walked past them without a word. He had already sent the video evidence to Stratus's CEO, and the request for a full audit was already underway. What the flight attendants didn't know, what no one knew, was that Malcolm had set a trap that would expose every subtle form of discrimination that had been overlooked for years. When the cabin crew disembarked, they would be greeted not by the usual routine, but by a team of HR officers. No longer would their behaviors go unchecked. No longer would their dismissive attitudes be tolerated. And as they would soon find out, Malcolm Rivers wasn't someone to be underestimated. As he watched the crew unknowingly move toward the exit, Malcolm felt a sense of satisfaction. He didn't need to say anything to them. He didn't need to make a spectacle. They would soon realize that their behavior had consequences. Consequences they couldn't escape. The transformation had already begun. As the plane touched down in Geneva, Malcolm Rivers's plan was already in motion. The cabin crew, still unaware of what was coming, went about their usual routine, thinking everything was fine. But the reality was far from that. The minute they stepped off the plane, they were met by HR and security, their careers unraveling before their eyes. They had no idea that their actions, small slights of discrimination, dismissive attitudes, and favoritism had just led to their termination. All because they didn't recognize the power in front of them when it was seated in seat 1A. The flight attendants who had underestimated Malcolm didn't get a dramatic confrontation. Instead, they were quietly escorted away, their employment records frozen, their actions under review. This wasn't just a firing, it was a statement. One simple act of disrespect had unraveled the system of complacency that had allowed such behavior to go unchecked. Malcolm's message was clear. No one, no matter how high or low, should ever be treated as less than anyone else. By the time Stratus's leadership found out, the change was already in motion. It wasn't a loud protest or a public outcry. It was a quiet, calculated strike that left them no choice but to acknowledge the flaws in their service and culture. Malcolm had done more than just hold the crew accountable. He had sparked a shift in an entire company's values, proving that respect and equality are not optional, they are non-negotiable. The crew didn't just lose their jobs. They lost the privilege of thinking they could dismiss anyone. Malcolm Rivers didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand attention. But his quiet response spoke louder than any protest. This wasn't just about a missed meal. It was about the dignity of every person who's ever been overlooked, dismissed, or made to feel invisible. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Real change starts with real stories, and we've got many more to come.